What if the very thing that makes you human, your capacity to reflect, to question, to know, is the thing that should never have existed? Wessel Zapffe, a Norwegian philosopher writing in the shadow of the Second World War, believed exactly that. Consciousness is a biological mistake, an evolutionary dead end dressed up as triumph. Two questions will structure what follows. First, can a trait that evolution selected for consciousness, our supposed crown jewel, simultaneously be a curse that dooms the species? Second, if Zapffe is right, and we are all walking around with a survival mechanism that destroys us from within, what exactly are we doing each morning when we open our eyes and continue? Start with the claim itself. In his 1933 essay, The Last Messiah, Zapffe writes that humanity is the tragic victim of an evolutionary overshoot. Evolution does not plan ahead. It selects for traits that improve immediate survival and reproduction. Intelligence worked, at first, but evolution cannot foresee the point at which intelligence becomes reflex, the point at which the organism turns inward and asks, why? That question, why, is the crack in the edifice. Other animals do not ask it. They suffer, they die, but they do not know they will die. They do not narrate their own extinction. Zapffe argues that when consciousness reached a certain threshold, it began to perceive things incompatible with the will to live. The enormity of cosmic indifference, the certainty of personal death, the futility of meaning-making in a universe that produces and discards without memory. You know these things already. You have always known them. But think carefully. How often do you allow yourself to fully apprehend them? This is Zapffe's insight. The human mind cannot bear the weight of its own clarity. Full awareness would be paralyzing. So we develop defenses. Not consciously, not deliberately, but as species, as individuals, we learn to look away. Zapffe identifies four mechanisms by which we manage the unbearable, four strategies of repression. He calls them isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation. Isolation. The mind isolates unbearable thoughts. You do not forget that you will die, but you quarantine the thought. You know it is there, but you do not touch it. It sits in a corner of your consciousness, acknowledged, but inert. Consider how rarely you think about your own non-existence. Not because you have forgotten, but because you have learned not to look. Anchoring. We fasten ourselves to values, duties, projects, a career, a family, a cause, something to hold on to when the ground shifts. Zapffe writes that the anchor is arbitrary. It does not matter what you anchor to, only that you anchor. The content of your life matters less than the structure. You need something to get up for, even if you no longer remember why. What are you anchored to right now? And if it were suddenly gone, what would happen to the floor beneath you? Distraction, the most familiar. Entertainment, gossip, busyness, noise. Anything to keep the silence at bay. Zapffe saw this in 1933, long before smartphones, before streaming, before the attention economy weaponized distraction. But he understood the principle. The mind abhors a vacuum. Fill it with anything, no matter how trivial, rather than let it confront itself. How much of your day is structured to prevent a certain kind of silence? Ask yourself, then notice the resistance to asking. Sublimation, the most dignified defense, transforms suffering into art, philosophy, science. Make meaning from the very awareness that nothing means anything. This is the mechanism Zapffe himself employed. The essay you are hearing about is his own act of sublimation. He takes the unbearable fact of consciousness and turns it into philosophy. A beautiful irony. The critique of meaning-making is itself an act of meaning-making. But Zapffe knows this. He is not naive. Sublimation does not resolve the paradox. It only makes it bearable enough to continue. These four mechanisms, isolation, anchoring, distraction, sublimation, are not failures of character. They are the price of consciousness. Without them, Zapffe believed, we would collapse under the weight of what we know. We would see too clearly to continue. So the question becomes, if this is true, if consciousness is a trap we cannot escape, what should we do? Zapfe's answer is the one nobody wants to hear. If consciousness is a mistake, the ethical response is to stop reproducing it. He writes, "Know yourselves, be infertile, and let the earth be silent after you." This is not cruelty. He frames it as compassion. To bring a child into the world is to inflict consciousness upon them, to sentence them to the same unbearable awareness you carry. The objection rises immediately. But people find joy, love, loyalty, meaning, deity. Are those not enough to justify existence? Zapffe would say, those are the mechanisms at work. Distraction, anchoring, sublimation. You mistake survival strategies for justifications. The joy you feel does not erase the fact of what you are. A conscious being trapped in a biological imperative that cannot deliver what it promises. What does it mean to read this and feel not outrage, but recognition? What does it mean if part of you agrees? Zapffe was not the first to arrive at antinatalism. Schopenhauer had walked this path before him, but Zapffe framed it biologically. This is not metaphysics. This is evolutionary biology gone wrong. A mutation that spread because it was useful, until it became lethal. The species that became too aware to continue. The organism that evolved itself into a corner. His conclusion is cold and clear. The most ethical act is the final one. Let the human experiment end. And yet, here is where the story takes a turn that undoes its own certainty. Wessel Zapffe, the philosopher who argued that consciousness is unbearable, lived for 91 years. He did not only live, he climbed mountains. For decades, Zapffe was a pioneering alpinist, ascending some of Norway's most dangerous peaks. He married, he wrote, he taught. He engaged with the world not as a man awaiting extinction, but as a man inhabiting his own paradox. How do you reconcile this? The man who says life is unbearable, and then bears it, fully, passionately, for 9 decades? The answer, if there is one, lies in sublimation. Zapffe did not deny the mechanisms. He used them. The climb was not an escape from the argument. It was an enactment of it. To climb is to confront death deliberately, to choose risk over safety. To write is to transform the unbearable into language. To teach is to anchor oneself in the continuity of thought, even if you believe that continuity is doom. Zapffe did not live in contradiction to his philosophy. He lived inside it, fully conscious of the mechanisms he employed to endure. This is the deeper pessimism. Not that life is unbearable, but that we bear it anyway. Not that we should end, but that we do not. What does it mean that Zapffe, who saw everything, continued? Did he fail his own argument or prove it? We arrive, then, at the question that has been suspended over this entire account. The question you have been waiting to ask. If Zapffe is right, what do we do? Not in theory, not in the abstract. Tomorrow morning, next week, the rest of your life. One response: reject the premise. Insist that consciousness is a gift, that meaning is real, that Zapffe missed something essential. But notice what that requires: a leap of faith indistinguishable from the anchoring and sublimation Zapffe described. Another response: accept the premise and continue anyway. Use the mechanisms knowingly. Climb your mountains. Write your essays. Anchor yourself to what you can. This is what Zapffe himself did. He did not pretend the mechanisms were solutions. He used them as tools for endurance. There's a kind of honesty in this, a refusal to pretend the paradox resolves. You see it clearly and you continue. Not because it makes sense, but because you are built to. Or perhaps there is a third response, the one that Zapffe articulated but could not embody. Stop. Not suicide. He did not advocate that. But the quiet refusal to reproduce the mistake, to let the species conclude on its own terms. This is the antinatalist position, and it horrifies, not because it is cruel, but because it might be compassionate in a way we cannot afford to accept. Which response is yours? You do not need to answer now, but you will answer. Every morning you wake up, you are answering. Zapffe forces a question most philosophy allows you to avoid. What do you do when clarity offers no comfort? When the truth, if it is the truth, does not set you free but only makes the weight more visible? Some philosophies offer hope. Some offer meaning. Zapffe offers only recognition. The recognition that you already knew this. That you have been isolating, anchoring, distracting, sublimating all along. That this is what it means to be human. We return now to the two questions that opened this inquiry. First, can consciousness, the evolutionary trait we celebrate as our triumph, be simultaneously the thing that dooms us? Zapffe answered yes. Evolution does not care about happiness. It cares about reproduction. And consciousness, reflexive, insatiable, meaning-seeking consciousness, may be viable enough to spread but too painful to justify. Second, if this is true, what are we doing each morning when we continue? Zapffel's answer: we are employing the mechanisms, isolating what we cannot bear, anchoring to what we can. Distracting ourselves from the silence, sublimating suffering into something we can hold. He did not call this victory. He called it survival. And he survived, climbed, wrote, taught, endured, not because he found an answer, but because he was, like all of us, built to continue. The question is no longer whether he was